What if Rome had never adopted Christianity? Imagine a world where the pantheon never became a church, where Jupiter, not Jesus, remained the divine protector of Rome. The year is 312 CE. Emperor Constantine stands at the Milvian Bridge, awaiting a battle that will determine his fate. In our timeline, he saw a vision. "In this sign you shall conquer." He painted Christian symbols on his soldiers' shields and won a decisive victory. But what if that vision never came? What if, instead of embracing the cross, Rome had continued worshiping its ancient gods? Close your eyes and picture a modern world where the Vatican doesn't exist, where the Colosseum hosts religious festivals to Mars rather than standing as a monument to Christian martyrs. Today, we're traveling down history's untrodden path to discover a world where Rome never adopted Christianity, and why that single decision might have completely transformed the world you know. But to imagine how differently history could have unfolded, we have to go back to the very night everything might have changed. Before Christianity's rise, before the cross conquered the eagle, one decision stood at the heart of it all. Let's begin at the tipping point. The moment when Constantine, sword in hand, stood between two futures. Let's get started. The night Rome chose its gods. The sunset bleeds crimson across the Tiber River as Constantine's men sharpen their swords. Tomorrow, they face Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, a battle where 100,000 men will clash for the soul of an empire. Constantine paces in his tent, the weight of Rome on his shoulders. Across the empire, nearly 60 million subjects await the outcome, their lives hanging in the balance. The Christian minority, about 5 million strong, pray in secret chambers, their faith punishable by death under Diocletian's edicts that had seen over 3,000 Christians executed in the past decade alone. In our timeline, Constantine's eyes turned skyward that night. The air shimmered with something impossible. A cross of light and the words, "In this sign, conquer." By morning, his soldiers' shields bore the Chi-Rho symbol. By nightfall, Maxentius's body washed ashore the Tiber, and the empire's destiny was forever altered. But what if the skies remained empty that night? Imagine Constantine turning instead to the old gods, perhaps leaving an offering at Mars' altar as Roman generals had done for 1,000 years. Picture him consulting the haruspices, who read animal entrails for divine messages, a practice dating back to Etruscan times when Rome was nothing but 7 hills and ambition. The threads of history are woven from such moments. When Julian the Apostate later attempted to restore traditional Roman religion in 361 CE, he found Christianity too entrenched to dislodge. But without Constantine's conversion, without the Edict of Milan that returned property to Christians and legitimized their faith, Julian might never have been called apostate at all. In those critical years between 312 and 337 CE, Christianity transformed from persecuted cult to imperial favor. Constantine's mother, Helena, traveled to Jerusalem, establishing pilgrimage sites that still draw millions today. His funding built the first saint, Peter's Basilica, while his Council of Nicaea in 325 CE standardized Christian beliefs across the empire. All this, erased in our alternate world. The empire stands at the crossroads, but takes the ancient path instead of the new one, and what awaits down that road changes everything. So what does a Rome without the cross actually look like? With Christianity still outlawed and pagan traditions intact, the empire begins to chart a very different course. Let's explore how this ancient detour reshapes the lives, beliefs, and rituals of millions across the empire. Rome without a cross. As Constantine's troops march triumphantly through Rome without Christian symbols, the religious landscape of the empire remains in delicate balance. The temples of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva still dominate the skyline, their marble facades gleaming with sacrificial oils. In homes across the empire, families still gather around Lararia, household shrines where they leave offerings to their ancestors and household gods. For the Christian communities huddled in catacombs and private homes, the dream of acceptance slips further away. Nearly 10% of the empire, communities built over 300 years of quiet growth, continue living in the shadows. The blood of martyrs like Perpetua and Felicity, who faced wild beasts in Carthage's arena rather than renounce their faith, remains fresh in their collective memory. Meanwhile, other mystery cults flourish in this alternate Rome. Temples to Mithras, the bull-slaying deity popular among soldiers, multiply across frontier provinces. By 350 CE, Mithric initiates number nearly 3 million, their underground temples hosting secretive rituals of brotherhood and spiritual rebirth. Without Christianity's imperial favor, these competing faiths claim the spiritual vacuum. In the East, where Hellenistic traditions blend with Roman rule, the cult of Isis draws thousands. Her temples in Alexandria and Antioch overflow with worshippers seeking the goddess's healing powers. The emperor's continued patronage of traditional religion means annual festivals grow more elaborate. The Lupercalia, where young men race naked through Rome's streets to ensure fertility, continues uninterrupted for centuries rather than being abolished in 494 CE. The human cost reveals itself in countless individual choices. The Roman aristocrat Symmachus, who in our timeline fought a losing battle to keep the altar of victory in the Senate, instead sees his traditional values preserved. Christianity's revolutionary message of equality before God, where, as Paul wrote, there is neither slave nor free, remains a fringe philosophy rather than transforming social hierarchies. Perhaps most consequentially, in 381 CE, when Emperor Theodosius would have declared Christianity the state religion and banned pagan practices, our alternate Rome instead sees a flourishing religious marketplace. The temples remain open, the sacred fires still burn, and the ancient contractual relationship between Romans and their gods, do ut des, I give that you might give, continues unbroken. As the 4th century closes, this vibrant yet fragmented religious landscape faces its greatest test, the barbarians massing beyond the Rhine and Danube. Without Christianity's unifying force, how will Rome respond when its walls begin to crumble? That question becomes hauntingly real as the empire begins to fracture. Without the spiritual glue of Christianity, Rome faces its darkest hour more divided than ever. As barbarians approach, the crumbling empire must rely on ancient gods and fading traditions. The fall of Rome plays out in a world unrecognizable to us. The fall of Rome reimagined. The year is 410 CE. Alaric's Visigoths stand before Rome's walls, not as Christian brothers to be negotiated with, but as pagan rivals facing the sacred city of Mars. The smoke from sacrifices rises from the temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus, as priests desperately seek divine intervention. In our timeline, when Rome fell, Bishop Augustine wrote, "The city of God," arguing that Rome's Christian identity transcended its physical destruction. But in this world, no such comfort exists. Without Christianity's universalizing influence, the empire fragments along ancient tribal and religious lines. The barbarian Stilicho, half-Vandal general who rose to defend Rome in our timeline, finds fewer paths to assimilation in this staunchly traditional society. Roman identity remains tied to ancestral cults rather than transferable faith. When Germanic tribes crossed the frozen Rhine in 406 CE, as 80,000 warriors and their families did during that fateful winter, they encounter not potential Christian converts, but religious strangers. In imperial libraries across the empire, over 90% of classical literature that would have been lost still exists. The poems of Sappho, of which we have mere fragments today, remain intact as complete volumes. The works of Aristotle aren't rediscovered during the Renaissance, they never disappear. Yet without monastic copying traditions, texts become concentrated in fewer locations, vulnerable to fire and conquest. The human tragedy unfolds in countless personal apocalypses. A Roman woman in Trier clutches statues of her household gods as she flees advancing Franks. A priest of Mithras in Londinium performs final rites before abandoning his temple to Saxon raiders. In Rome itself, the Vestal Virgins, whose 1,100-year tradition of tending sacred flames would have ended in 394 CE in our timeline, make their final desperate offerings as the city falls. Perhaps most poignantly, this alternate Rome sees different heroes emerge. Without church structure providing continuity, local leaders rise to fill the void. Roman military commanders like Aetius, the last great Roman general who defeated Attila, fights not as a Christian defending civilization, but as the final guardian of a traditional order stretching back to Romulus. As the empire's western provinces crumble one by one, Britain by 410, Spain by 472, North Africa by 439, the transfer of power happens without the mediating influence of bishops and converts. The magnificent Villa Romana del Casale in Sicily, with its famous bikini-clad mosaic athletes, isn't preserved as a bishop's residence, but becomes a fortress for local warlords, its artistic treasures looted rather than repurposed. By 476 CE, when Odoacer deposes the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, the fall feels more complete. Without the Church maintaining Roman administrative systems and Latin literacy, the break with the classical past cuts deeper, leaving Europe adrift in very different dark ages. But history doesn't end at the fall. It mutates, evolves, survives. In the ashes of empire, a new kind of Europe rises, not bound by bishops or Christendom, but by tribal loyalties, ancient myths, and fractured powers. Welcome to a medieval world with no Holy Roman Empire, and no Holy Church to begin with. A different medieval world. Dawn breaks over a 9th century Europe unrecognizable to our eyes. Where Canterbury Cathedral should stand, a weathered temple to Mercury overlooks trading ships. In Rome, the Pantheon never became a church. Instead, its perfect dome still honors all gods, sacrificial smoke rising through its oculus for 1,000 years uninterrupted. Political fragmentation defines this world. Without the Pope as kingmaker, as when Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor in 800 CE, Europe's power structures remain localized and tribal. The concept of Christendom that united medieval Europeans against common threats never materializes. When Norse raiders strike in the 9th century, some 347 Viking attacks recorded against monasteries in our timeline, they find not wealthy Christian outposts, but fragmented pagan settlements with less concentrated wealth. Knowledge follows different paths in this divergent medieval era. Without church-founded universities like Bologna in 1088, our world's oldest, learning remains the province of private tutors and mystery cult initiations. The 10,000 students who would have studied at the University of Paris by 1300 CE instead seek wisdom in smaller, specialized academies. Greek natural philosophy continues uninterrupted, not rediscovered during the Renaissance, but preserved in living traditions free from theological constraints. In the Byzantine East, the empire evolves differently without Christianity as its binding force. The magnificent Hagia Sophia, with its 102-foot dome that seemed to hang from heaven by a golden chain, is never built. Constantinople remains a city of classical temples rather than churches. Without Christianity's prohibition on surgical dissection, physician guilds openly study human anatomy, advancing medical knowledge centuries earlier. Perhaps most dramatically transformed is the Mediterranean world. Without Christianity's theological conflicts with Islam, the religious landscape of the Middle East develops along different lines when Muhammad receives his revelations in the 7th century. The distinction between Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, House of Peace and House of War, takes on different meanings without a Christian Europe as counterpoint. The Crusades that mobilized over 100,000 Europeans to the Holy Land never occur. Families experience different rhythms of life. Without the Christian calendar marking time, seasonal pagan festivals continue to structure the year. A woman in Francia celebrates Imbolc rather than Candlemas in February, while a merchant in Hispania times his voyages to Neptune's festival rather than St. Nicholas Day. Marriage remains a family contract rather than a religious sacrament, with different implications for inheritance and family structure. By the year 1000, when many Christians fearfully anticipated the apocalypse, this alternate world continues its gradual evolution, a tapestry of competing traditions rather than a unified religious culture. The Latin phrase Roma Aeterna, eternal Rome, takes on new meaning as aspects of classical civilization persist into an age that, in our timeline, would have been dominated by the cross. Fast forward to the present day, and the echoes of that ancient decision still ripple through time. A Rome that never turned Christian would have reshaped not just faith, but science, art, politics, even how we measure time. So, what does our modern world look like without 2,000 years of Christianity? The modern world transformed. Standing in our reimagined 21st century, we would find ourselves strangers in a strangely familiar land. The skyline of Rome shows no saint. Peter's Basilica, its 448-foot dome never conceived by Michelangelo. Instead, a grand temple of Jupiter crowns the Vatican Hill, its ancient foundations never abandoned, its columns reaching skyward in classical proportions rather than Baroque curves. The tapestry of Western art tells different stories. The 1,100 rooms of the Louvre hold no Madonnas with child, no Last Suppers, no crucifixions. Instead, the artistic tradition flowing from Greece and Rome continued uninterrupted. Millions of masterpieces depicting Odysseus, Aeneas, and the Olympian gods. The Sistine Chapel never existed. Perhaps in its place stands a magnificent ceiling painted with Prometheus, giving fire to humanity, rather than God giving life to Adam. Listen closely to the music-filling concert halls. Bach's 224 cantatas, most written for Lutheran church services, were never composed. Mozart's Requiem doesn't haunt our ears. Instead, perhaps elaborate symphonic works celebrate the myths of Orpheus or the triumph of Hercules, developed from ancient Greek modes and rhythms rather than Gregorian chants. The foundation of ethics and law follows dramatically different courses. The 56 men who signed the American Declaration of Independence in our timeline, educated in traditions heavily influenced by Christian natural law, instead ground their revolutionary ideas in purely classical philosophy. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ratified by 48 nations in 1948, finds different philosophical ancestors than the "all men are created equal" concept with its roots in Christian theology. Educational institutions bear unfamiliar names. Harvard, founded in 1636 primarily to train Puritan ministers, doesn't exist. Neither do the 900-plus universities established by the Catholic Church before 1500. Knowledge develops through different channels, perhaps with stronger connections to Islamic and Asian intellectual traditions without religious barriers to exchange. The calendar marking our days follows ancient Roman traditions. We live not in 2025 CE, but in 2778 AUC, Abi Urbe Condita, since the founding of Rome. Weekdays honor celestial bodies rather than Norse gods and Christian observances. No Christmas trees illuminate December homes. Instead, perhaps Saturnalia's gift-giving and role reversal celebrations continue a 2,500-year unbroken tradition. Most profoundly, the internal landscapes of billions of minds differ. The concept of secular humanism, itself a reaction to and outgrowth of Christian worldviews, never develops in the same way. The scientific method, which emerged in dialogue with faith in our timeline, follows different evolutionary paths. The religious comfort sought by approximately 31% of today's global population, the 2.4 billion Christians, finds expression through different spiritual channels. Even our language loses thousands of idioms. No Good Samaritan, no prodigal son, no moving mountains with faith. The very architecture of how we express meaning shifts subtly but profoundly, revealing how deeply Christianity has shaped even the thoughts of non-believers in our world. Conclusion. History isn't just about battles won and empires fallen. It's about choices, beliefs, and moments that redirect the entire human story. Constantine's vision, or lack thereof in our alternate timeline, shows us how profoundly religion shapes societies, values, and human lives across centuries. Whether you're religious or not, understanding this pivotal moment helps us appreciate how deeply interconnected history truly is. How one man's spiritual experience echoed through millennia to shape the very world beneath our feet. If this alternate Rome blew your mind, imagine what would have happened if Alexander had lived another decade, or if Genghis Khan had invaded Europe. That's all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to show some love by hitting that like and subscribe button.